It's no secret that the new player experience in Dead by Daylight is abysmal. The game is often cited to be one of the worst new player experiences someone can go through. This is partly because of the massive grind if you're not playing during events or other times where blood point gains are increased, partly because of the abhorrent price and time investment to unlock everything, and partly because the tutorial offered by the game itself is fundamentally flawed. There's a lot to say about the tutorials for both roles in this game, especially since you know it's been abandoned when even the Macmillan Estate realm lighting doesn't match the one you'd see in the actual game. There's an absolute boatload of stuff to talk about in regards to the new player experience, but not all of it is reasonable for a new player to learn as soon as they start. Like, I wouldn't expect Howard coming home from his 9 to 5 at the local gas station to fully learn or understand 800 plus add-ons, 200 plus perks, and the ins and outs of every killer in existence as soon as he bought the game with his weekly paycheck because he heard Springtrap from FNAF recently got added. As a result, we're going to focus more on the general gameplay loop of the game rather than trying to figure out how to explain Doctor's essay-long add-on descriptions to someone playing him for the first time. We'll be talking about each tutorial, what they neglect to tell players about DBD's gameplay loop, and how I would rework them. Maybe not solve every single problem with getting into this game, but at the very least, do a significantly better job at explaining DBD's gameplay loop and reduce the amount of people needing to watch an 8-hour-long Otstarva video regarding just how to function in this game. Loading into the Survivor tutorial, you're greeted with Dwight Fairfield as your character. After learning to look around, run around, and being presented with most killer players' kryptonite, you're instructed to vault a window and finish a generator that's almost done, acting as your introduction to gen repairs and skill checks. After vaulting a couple more windows, you get caught by a bear trap, where you'll then be met with John Beartrap himself absolutely wrecking your shit. Suddenly, Meg appears as Trapper is carrying you and shows you that dropping pallets on killers can stun them and free survivors, freeing you and causing the scripted Trapper bot to go after her instead. You yourself drop a pallet, for some reason, on your way to Meg, and she ends up getting hooked. After saving her, she immediately goes into a locker nearby, and you're instructed to do the same thing, leading to the Trapper bot pulling you out and hooking you. Interestingly, the game does teach players about the anti-face camp system here, being called the resolve meter by the game. After being told to try and self-unhook, Meg gets you off the hook and the game proceeds to make you heal her before she does the exact same thing. Afterwards, the two of you finish the last generator together, open the exit gate, then you have the choice of either leaving through the gate or using the nearby hatch to end the Survivor tutorial. So now that the tutorial was discussed, let's dissect everything here. First of all, the game actively encourages you to throw pallets for zero reason to do so, and while the game does demonstrate that you can use them to go for saves and mentions in the tooltip that they can slow killers down, there is absolutely zero mention of looping and wasting the killer's time, which is your same goal in Chase as well as not trying to die. Thanks to this game not being built to be a hide-and-seek game anymore, looping is a vital part of both roles, and not having it mentioned in the tutorial where it would be at its most important is already setting players up for failure, and not explaining how to use pallets very well as well also encourages bad habits. Speaking of bad habits, the tutorial also encourages you to hide in lockers and heal unhookers the second you get unhooked, under hook as well. Healing under the hook is generally a really bad thing unless you know the killer's busy first, or you're facing literally any of the top tiers, but the bigger issue here besides not relocating is healing the unhooker first, effectively wasting your unhook benefits as the unhooked survivor. Another big thing here is the game also encourages you to try self-unhooking. While this isn't as bad thanks to the anti-go next stuff that recently got added, it's still problematic to show and encourage new players to do that, especially if there's luck offerings in play that allow it from the get-go. Additionally, there is zero mention of totems, chests, the perk systems, items, sabotaging, status effects, hooks, and a whole lot more mechanics that you commonly see in today's Dead by Daylight. Finally, the game only shows you Trapper's bear traps when starting out in the tutorial. While understandable since Trapper is extremely likely to be the first ever killer new players play or face, he is the box art killer after all. It leaves them with only a wall of text on the power descriptions to go off of when facing killers beyond Trapper, and even then the info gained about Trapper's traps is the bare minimum regarding getting snared by them. It doesn't talk about the chances of getting saved or helping others, it doesn't mention how many traps he has, it doesn't mention to pay attention to your surroundings, all that stuff that you gotta know against Trapper. Speaking of him, let's take a peek at that killer tutorial now, shall we? Loading into the kill tutorial, the game forces you as John D. Tier himself, showing you noise notifications, the red generator auras used for finding their locations, and how to kick generators. The game then shows you how scratch marks work, and shortly after you begin to pursue Meg around once you vault the window she vaulted herself. After getting pallet stunned, you are shown how to break pallets and how to set up a bear trap, doing so to corner Meg in a wide open field to chase, attack, down, and hook her. Once Meg goes next because you hooked her as the first survivor that match, you are prompted to close the hatch, and upon doing so, a Jake spawns in and steps into your trap, allowing you to walk over and either down him or pick him up to hook him as well, removing him from the game without struggle and ending the killer tutorial. Holy... This was probably an even worse tutorial than the Survivor one. Similarly to the Survivor tutorial, there is once again zero mention of looping, totems, perks, status effects, and the usual stuff I just talked about a second ago, but there's also some unique stuff to the kill tutorial to go over as well. In the generator section, the tutorial neglects to talk about the anti-3 gen system, making it so you can only have 8 regression events on each gen before it becomes permanently blocked off from killer interaction. Trapper's power is also explained poorly from the killer tutorial as well, as it mentions nothing about finding a bear trap around the map or how to use them in your average match. And instead, the game just plops one of them in your inventory to block off Meg's escape route for the purposes of the power tutorial. There's also no mention of killers being able to drop survivors back onto the ground in the event that hooking's impossible. Breakable walls, which, funnily enough, is shown in the Survivor tutorial of all places, even though survivors can't interact with them. The basement and how dangerous it is for survivors to be in there, and neglecting to mention how long hook stages last for, which is crucial for killers to know and especially for survivors. There's also a lack of mentioning of the red stain being visible for survivors while invisible to killers unless they have undetectable. Both tutorials share things they don't explain, status effects, perks, and items being the primary things between them. However, there's one place in the entire game where these things are introduced to new players if they so choose to read them, if they even know this exists in the first place. Let's be real here. How many of you knew Dead by Daylight has a game manual? And of those of you that know about it, how many of you have actually gone in and read it? Going in order as I read this in real time and write this bit of the script out, the game only mentions the entity being the one to finish survivors off on hooks, but it doesn't mention that it can also block totems, generators, pallets, vaults, and exit gates with perks in the section dedicated for it. When discussing status effects, Haste and Hinder's descriptions are incorrect in saying that only the highest value is used instead of stacking, likely due to the recalled Haste and Hinder stacking update a while back. Boons, unlike Hex totems, do not mention that survivors can see them amongst the team and are highlighted blue, whereas the Hex totems are properly described to identify them. When discussing generator repairs in the Survivor tutorial, while it is correct in saying to look out for floodlights and listening for the gen repair sounds to track them, it doesn't bring up that some maps, mainly indoor ones, have environmental indicators for where generators can be located at, such as the closed rooms on Gideon's or Hawkins, or flashing signs on Larry's, for example. Chests do not mention the rummaging option caused by the higher tier key items and the appraisal perk. In the killer manual, damaging generators does not mention that entity blockage on regressing generators pause the regression, mentions the anti-3 gen system but doesn't specify the exact number needed for them to trigger, and doesn't provide the 5% regression instant penalty number. Neither tutorials talk about looping at all to waste killer time or ways to mind game survivors in them to force mistakes, as well as still not giving a basic overview of how every item in this game works. There's also zero mention of killer instinct in the tracking section on the killer manual. The manuals also provide little to no visuals of these mechanics in play with the exception of the status icons, and as mentioned earlier with the anti-3 gen system, very rarely will the manual give exact numbers for stuff like the anti-face camp. There's way more I can talk about in this manual, such as the lack of hook stage time still being an issue and the lack of mentioning grades not affecting matchmaking, but we'd be here all day if I listed every single nook and cranny of information the manual omits from new players. Long story short, while the manual does a somewhat better job at covering important information than the tutorials do, very low bar, I know, it comes at the side effect of covering the bare minimum, as well as players not being able to see this information for themselves in practice until they either get on solo queue or look up a YouTube video. We live in a day and age where TikTok and YouTube Shorts have absolutely fried our brains, and not many people have the time and patience to read a wall of text with no accompanying visual, or at the very least, having a PNG to look at in regards to what's being talked about. There's plenty of people out there who do a lot better when you show them examples of what's being discussed rather than only talking about it. The show, don't tell method, if you will. Several PvP games have visuals to go along with their controls or other mechanics, and given how complicated DBD can be, the manual would massively benefit from visuals as well. It'd also help if the manual was relocated to a better spot in the menu rather than being tucked away in a little tab in the Learn to Play section where most people can easily miss it. So how do we fix this mess of a starting system? Well, while I don't think it's possible to explain literally everything in this game at once to avoid overwhelming new players, there is a much better way to present the information and get newer players on the right track. Allow me to propose a new tutorial system, manual system, and killer power exclamation system concept, if I may. This rework tutorial idea focuses on addressing many of the problem points the current tutorial has, such as encouraging bad habits and not being up to date with how the game is currently played. Is it perfect? Hell no. No tutorial is, especially since everyone plays this game differently and it's meant to just show the basics rather than, welcome to Dead by Daylight. Here's how you play literally every tile ever. Have fun! For the survivor role, the tutorial's beginning stages remain the same. Learn to look, walk around, teabag, and learn how to vault windows and pallets, although this time the pallet is already dropped as opposed to the game making you drop it for no reason near the killer. Nearby, Meg is working on a generator where Trapper suddenly bursts through a nearby breakable wall and starts beelining for you. The game encourages you to run to a nearby tile by making its resources glow yellow in order to use said resources to run around the tile and waste the Trapper's time long enough for Meg to finish the generator. Which, for the purposes of the tutorial, let's give it about 10 seconds. Once the generator pops, Trapper will leave and go after Meg, with the game instructing you to search for a generator which will be highlighted for you. As you're working on it and being introduced to skill checks, the game will draw attention to the HUD to show what the markings around the survivor icons mean, as well as showing the difference between health states and introducing the hook counter. After about halfway through the generator, Meg will go down and get hooked, encouraging you to get off the generator to rescue her. After unhooking her and being prompted to return to your generator with her, the game will show you how to heal, then have the two of you finish off the rest of the generator, prompting the exit gates to become powered. Once this occurs, Trapper's Terror Radius begins playing, the game encouraging you to get into a locker to hide, while also explaining lockers can activate or counter specific perks, and advising to be careful when using these against attentive killers, a point reinforced by Trapper arriving to grab you out and hook you into the basement. After the game explains the dangers of the basement and Trapper goes off to hide somewhere within it, triggering an explanation about the resolve mechanic and how it disables an endgame, Meg will cautiously come down the stairs to rescue you, prompting Trapper to come ambush and attack both of you, causing Meg to die in the basement while you finish off the exit gate. Once endgame collapse is triggered, you have the choice to escape through the gate or from the hatch nearby as usual while Trapper approaches. This version of the Survivor tutorial shows a much better version of how modern DBD is played on a baseline level, their bare minimum while also elaborating on features briefly glossed over in the original tutorial. But catch up, I hear you saying. This doesn't go over items, chests, totems, etc. Don't worry, this is not the end of the tutorial. We will be coming back to this in a bit. For the moment, let's switch gears and talk about the reworked killer tutorial concept. Playing as Trapper, you are shown generator auras, noise notifications, and are told to patrol gens to find survivors as normal. When approaching a generator, you witness Jake reacting to your presence because of your terror radius and red stain and proceed to run off towards a window, teaching the player scratch marks. You're instructed to kick the generator, where the game tells you about the gen kick limit and shows a visual of the spikes warning you of the limit activating soon. Afterwards, you are instructed to follow Jake by vaulting the window he did, chasing him into a dead-end room with a breakable wall. You are taught how to attack, pick up, and hook survivors with this Jake, killing him instantly on the hook for tutorial purposes. Afterwards, you are instructed to break the breakable wall, leading you to Meg and Dwight from the Survivor tutorial, and you're instructed to go after Dwight. Initiating a basic looping tutorial for Killer, you loop Dwight around until you injure him, causing him to drop the pallet and run away in order to teach players the importance of applying pressure to survivors through injuries and breaking resources wisely, causing the game to instruct you to break the pallet and go after Meg, who finished repairing the generator after the pallet break animation's done. After downing and hooking Meg in an actual looping scenario where the game has you use what you've learned so far to down her, the game will tell you about the resolve meter and encourage you to go find Dwight, a marker pinpointing his location on the map. On your way to him, Meg will die on hook and the hatch will spawn near the pinpoint, instructing the killer to close it and trigger the endgame collapse. Once the hatch is dealt with, the game will continue to push you to the pinpoint, revealing Dwight is inside the locker. Upon pulling him out, the game will tell the killer how to drop survivors and perform moris on the last survivor in the trial, giving the killer the choice to hook Dwight or mori him. These two tutorials I feel help modernize the base idea of the game to both roles, but they still have the issues of leaving out a lot of important information. Well, that's where the interactive manual, or as I'm going to call it, the advanced tutorial, comes into play. In this hypothetical advanced tutorial, the manual section gets replaced by tutorial scenarios showcasing other aspects of the game, both survivor and killer roles sharing this section depending on what's being taught. These would include an overview of status effects and experiencing what they do in matches, a brief overview of survivor and killer perks by using the general and starter character perks to get the message, as well as showcasing how to access the perk menu in the lobby with visuals, how dull, hex, and boon totems work, scourge hooks, chests and the rummaging mechanic, sabotaging, all that jazz. This would also go over aura reveals and killer instinct, using Legion as the test character for simplicity regarding this topic. In the menus of this advanced tutorial tab, there would be text explaining each thing as well as a GIF or a PNG regarding the subject, accompanied by a more direct, hands-on tutorial to show these things off in-game. This tab would also contain your killer-specific tutorials, allowing you to select a killer in the killer menu to drop you in the tutorial as that killer, allowing you to learn the killer's power and what survivors can do to counter them. To make an example of something like this, Trapper's power tutorial would drop him onto a map and show him how to place bear traps, having him place his 2 traps in his inventory in predetermined spots. These locations being in grassy patches or at loops to give a general understanding of where these traps need to be placed at. The game would then explain how Trapper has 8 other traps scattered around the map and would make the next objective to search for, pick up, and place 5 of these wherever the player wishes. After placing these traps, a trap goes off and shows Dwight having disarmed one of the 2 traps placed initially at the start of the tutorial, encouraging you to chase that Dwight, leading him to getting snared in the other one. After explaining survivors have a 16.67% chance of escaping a bear trap and will always succeed on their 6th attempt, the game instructs the player to strike down Dwight or pick him up directly from the trap. After hooking him, the Trapper's power tutorial ends by warning you to be mindful of where you set your traps, as the Trapper can get himself caught in them as well, which can lead to survivors escaping off his shoulder when carrying them. Stuff like text and advanced power usage wouldn't be covered in the power tutorial thanks to this being, a tutorial for new players, but at the very least, it needs to cover vital basic information about how a power works. Item tutorials would be a lot quicker, especially for stuff like medkits, maps, toolboxes, and keys, but flashlights would show survivors how to blind killers, when is it a good time to try and blind, as well as show how to rescue survivors getting picked up by killers. In that same tutorial, it would switch to killers and explain the counterplay for flashlights by picking up survivors while looking at walls, or scouting around nearby for survivors hiding nearby. In regards to each tutorial system, the basic tutorials for base gameplay for survivors and killers would be mandatory upon first time startup, and completing them both would reward David King and Wraith like usual, but the advanced tutorials would be optional but highly recommended by the game, with each advanced tutorial session rewarding about 50k blood points each, allowing newer players to have much more than 150k blood points starting out with if they take the time to learn the rest of the tutorial, bringing them that much closer to figuring out what prestiging does and why that's important to do for everyone regardless of who you play. As for perks and add-ons, listen, we have so many of those at this point that outside of simply introducing the systems up front, I don't think there's a feasible way to expect someone new to learn 800 plus add-ons and 200 plus perks upon starting the game. Only experience is going to teach them those. The tutorial in Dead by Daylight is notoriously outdated, encouraging bad habits and stuff that is simply outdated and not recommended to do in this game's lifespan, or simply leaving out vital information that everyone in this game needs to know about. Will a rework tutorial fix solo queue? Fuck no. Solo queue is always going to be miserable regardless of what gets added. Hell, even if the postponed anti-tunnel and anti-slugging from the Sinister Grace PTB made it in, solo queue would still be miserable. However, I do think a rework tutorial like this, while it isn't perfect and wouldn't be able to do everything since there's just simply too much in this game to understand if you really want to get good at it, it would still be much better than what we have now and properly shows players how the game is generally played, giving them a bit of a better understanding of what to do when starting out. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more, feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join the community Discord. Let me know in the comments what you think of the tutorial rework concept or how you would better the new player experience in the game from a gameplay standpoint. And with that in mind, cheers!